Tuesday, February 11th, 2020. I've wanted to talk about this for some time. And now that the Democrats are poised to nominate a self-described socialist to represent their cause, and party for the presidency of the United States, there's no better time. Now, let me just couch that last sentence. Who knows what the ultimate decision will be from the Democrats, be it the Panjandrums or the Commoners. But the first two decisions the Democrats have made in Iowa and New Hampshire will be a majority of votes in Iowa and an outright victory in New Hampshire for Bernie Sanders. He now, by the way, leads the national polling for the Democratic Party, having overtaken Joe Biden in the latest Quinnipiac poll. I will remind what I said yesterday. No Democrat has ever won both Iowa and New Hampshire and not become the nominee of the party. But nominee or not, clearly there is strong support for the socialist message. A socialist message, or at minimum a downgrading, a defining down of the noxiousness of socialism. It's not the first time such a message or set of messengers were on the ticket, and it makes one think that if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, who will he choose as his running mate? My guess would be Elizabeth Sanders, but in any event, what a long, strange trip it's been when once upon a time a ticket of the Socialist Workers' Party could run for president in 1984 with Bernie Sanders' support and receive only 25,000 votes. Socialist Workers' Party, by the way, code for the Communist Party of the United States. So here you have the Democratic Party of Bernie Sanders, at least temporarily. It's a party whose candidate has traveled to the Soviet Union, not Russia, the Soviet Union in the late 1980s, when all of its depredations were well known, and sung the Soviet Union's praises while denouncing the United States from the Soviet Union, whose candidate, Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders, has praised the Castros and Cuba. It's a candidate whose very Senate website to this day praises the Venezuela healthcare system as better than ours. It's a candidate who says he wants to disrupt and revolutionize this country so that he would give the votes to incarcerated felons, everyone from black church bombers to marathon bombers. A candidate who promises full employment by offering jobs with the government if the private market, or what's left of it, will not hire you. Guaranteed employment with the government. Civil amnesty to criminals. Sound familiar? If it doesn't, I invite you to look about 103 miles south of Florida. Brian Riedel, one of the nation's most respected budget analysts, gives us the précis on the rest of the Sanders agenda. All told, Sanders' current plans would cost as much as $97.5 trillion over the next 10 years, and total government spending at all levels would surge to as high as 70% of gross domestic product. Approximately half of the American workforce would be employed by the government. The 10-year budget deficit would approach $90 trillion, with average annual deficits exceeding 30% of GDP. The $97.5 trillion price tag is made up mostly of the cost of Sanders' three most ambitious proposals. Sanders concedes that his Medicare for All plan would increase federal spending by somewhere between $30 and $40 trillion over a 10-year period. He pledges to spend $16.3 trillion on his climate plan, and his proposal to guarantee all Americans a full-time government job paying $15 an hour minimum with full benefits is estimated to cost $30.1 trillion. The final $11.1 trillion includes $3 trillion to forgive all student loans and guarantee free public college tuition, plus $1.8 trillion to expand Social Security, $2.5 trillion on housing, $1.6 trillion on paid family leave, $1 trillion on infrastructure, $800 billion on general K-12 education spending, and an additional $400 billion on higher public school teacher salaries. Talk about breaking the system. Not bankrupting it, breaking it. Not transforming it, breaking it. So it's time to ask the Abraham Lincoln question. How did we get here? If we could first know where we are and whither we are tending, we could then better judge what to do and how to do it, Lincoln said. Well, we've been warning of this for some time, since at least the 1980s, when major universities like Stanford began the task of replacing our history and civilization with a new one, based on all the Marxist concepts of race and post-colonialist theory. Throw in an antagonism, if not opposition, to Judeo-Christian values and religions, and there you go. Leading the way in 1988, Stanford, by a faculty vote of 39-4, voted to get rid of their Western civilization curriculum and replace it with something Marx himself could not have better labeled: cultures, ideas, and values. All cultures, all ideas, and values all being equal, or at least no better than any others. Objective truth by the wayside. Neglected here behind the lattice work of criticizing America was the quest to forget what Alan Bloom once wrote. Our story, the Western one, is the majestic triumph march of two principles: freedom and equality. A universal standard for legitimacy and treating human beings as human beings, from their minds and souls to their physical bodies. As Harry Jaffa has reminded, it was the Marxist view of the world that the task of philosophers up until Marx arrived was to interpret the world. Marx's view was it was now the task to change it, such that debate, religion, all became an opiate of the masses. You defeat your opponent's arguments by trampling on your opponents and treating them with contempt. And value judgments replaced reason and truth. Rather than taking human equality and freedom as a starting point, outside factors were used to replace truth, to determine truth, and to create common social enemies in need of re-education, gulags, or concentration camps. For Nazis, it would be religion and ethnicity. For Maoists and Leninists, it became class. How did this become attractive to idealistic youth in America? Well, it started, just as I said above, by downplaying the evil of communism. When Ronald Reagan proclaimed the Soviet Union an evil empire, the cognoscenti went nuts. The New York Times editorialized that his speech was, quote-unquote, primitive. It went on, quote, "If there is anything that should be illegitimate in the American system, it is such use of sectarian religiosity to sell a political program. And this was done not by some fringe figure, but by the President of the United States." How many people reading about the speech or seeing bits of it on television really noticed its outrageous character? Our political sensibilities have become degraded, close quote. New York Times on Reagan, speaking of the evil empire, calling it primitive. You see, right and wrong is primitive. Bad thinking, old thinking. It reminds me of nothing so much as what the Czech novelist Milan Kundera wrote. I quote it a lot. It's important. Before long, the nation will begin to forget what it is and what it was. Close quote. Are we not there after 40 years of this experiment? Nay, I should say, effort. Perhaps Jean-François Revel, the French philosopher, had it just as well. He wrote, "Clearly a civilization that feels guilty for everything it is and does will lack the energy and conviction to defend itself." Close quote. Well, we've been made to feel guilty for everything we have done. That is why so much of the left hammers at the slavery that existed in half of this country and yet ended 155 years ago, and refuses to condemn slavery where it exists presently in our midst today in China or African or Muslim cultures. You see, they are to be favored, apologized for, because, you see, they are poised against America. And we, by default, are always wrong. We are today's evil empire. Forgotten, of course, in this slavery defines us viewpoint is that it was only half the country in this country, not the whole country, and that the other half tried to and did eradicate it, singing such songs with lyrics as, quote, "With a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me, as he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, while God is marching on." But you see, we cannot teach that, or any more even know it, because we did good. And we did good with a religious culture, a Judeo-Christian ethic that is trying to be stamped out. That is not the socialist or Marxist way, Judeo-Christian ethics, the truth of the Western civilization. And so a mean elixir has been brewed for our youth here. As one professor recently put it, for those with no memory of the Cold War, the stigma of socialism doesn't exist. That now includes everyone under 30. I dare say it may be everyone under 40. Good work in writing those new books and manufacturing a new culture and inventing a new history. But if it takes, it will not end well. And that is why we fight. I'm Seth Leibsohn, 602-508. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about my friends at Guns Etc. They are true American patriots. They strongly support our president, and they have over 10,200 square feet of firearms and firearm accessories. Please take my advice and stop by their store, which is a symbol of American freedom, or visit them at gunsetcetera.com and have access to over $350 million in firearms merchandise.